Good evening. What unfolded inside the federal courthouse this week wasn't political theater. It was a breakdown of composure, broadcast for the nation to see. The kind of scene that makes even seasoned observers sit forward and ask, did that really just happen? It began during a public oversight hearing tied to the ongoing election integrity inquiries. Representative Jasmine Crockett, a former defense attorney turned congresswoman, had been called to testify on constitutional procedure. Sitting just a few feet away, across the long mahogany table, was a Republican member known for his temper, a man whose outbursts had made headlines before. The courtroom was full. Press lined the back wall. Microphones were positioned with care. The judge, an older man with silver hair and little patience for grandstanding, presided quietly from the bench. What happened next would ripple far beyond the walls of that room. The Republican rose for his questioning period. He didn't start with legal argument. He started with volume. "Congresswoman Crockett, I'm sick of this double standard," he shouted, his voice echoing across the chamber. "You come in here preaching about justice and fairness, yet you turn every issue into a racial circus. You laugh while our institutions crumble." Gasps rolled through the gallery. The bailiff shifted his stance, instinctively watching the floor. Crockett didn't flinch. She looked at him the way a surgeon looks at a patient already under anesthesia, calm, detached, deliberate. "Sir," she said softly, "this is a hearing, not a rally. I'd appreciate it if you'd lower your voice." But that only ignited him further. "Don't tell me how to speak. You sit there smirking while people like me get accused of hate for defending the Constitution." The judge tapped his gavel once, but the man was too far gone to notice. He leaned over his notes, hands trembling, voice rising. "You talk about equality, but what about accountability? You've turned justice into a spectacle." Crockett tilted her head. And then, in a moment that stopped the room cold, she laughed. It wasn't mocking. It wasn't loud. Just a single incredulous laugh, quiet enough that the microphones barely caught it, but sharp enough that it cut through every word he'd just shouted. The courtroom froze. Even the judge looked up. "Is something funny to you, Congresswoman?" he demanded. Crockett set her pen down carefully. "Only the irony, sir," she said, "that you'd speak of accountability while refusing to practice any." There was a ripple of murmurs. The man blinked, visibly thrown off balance. "You think this is a joke?" he barked. "No," she replied. "I think it's a hearing on election integrity. But you seem to think it's open mic night." A few reporters stifled laughs. Even the judge's expression tightened into what could only be described as restraint. "Order," he said, tapping his gavel again. "Representative, control yourself." The man tried to recover. "Your Honor, this witness is mocking the process." "No," Crockett replied evenly. "I'm defending it from being turned into a tantrum." That's when the laughter spread. Not from her, but from the back rows, low, startled chuckles from journalists who couldn't help it. The Republican's face turned red. He slammed his folder shut. "This is exactly what's wrong with your side," he growled. "You think this is entertainment." Crockett leaned forward slightly. "No, Congressman. I think justice is serious business. That's why I came prepared with evidence, while you came prepared with emotions." You could have heard a pin drop. "Evidence," he said, almost spitting the word. "Yes," Crockett said. "I have data from 3 separate state commissions confirming that the very laws you support have suppressed verified voter turnout by measurable percentages. I can read them aloud if you'd like, or you can keep shouting." The courtroom fell silent again. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceed with your statement, Congresswoman." She opened her folder calmly. "Your Honor, for the record, Exhibit C demonstrates a 14% decrease in voter access following restrictive ID implementations in 2022. That's not rhetoric, that's reality. And when this gentleman accuses me of laughing, he's right. I laugh to keep from crying over how far from reason this conversation has drifted." The judge nodded slowly. "Noted for the record." The Republican opened his mouth again, but no sound came out. Afterward, outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the steps. The clip had already gone viral before she even reached her car. The headline was everywhere within the hour. Crockett laughs, and lawmaker loses it. Cable networks replayed it on loop. Slowing down the moment, she leaned back and laughed. That single gesture of disbelief in the face of hysteria. Commentators called it the most controlled demolition in political cross-examination this year. For older Americans watching from home, it struck a nerve. They'd seen tempers flare in politics before, but rarely such quiet precision in response. It reminded them of when hearings meant something, when intellect could outlast outrage. By evening, talk radio was dissecting it line by line. Some called Crockett arrogant. Others called her disciplined. But almost everyone agreed. She'd handled it like a professional surrounded by amateurs. One retired judge put it plainly during an interview. That was the difference between advocacy and anger. One serves the law. The other serves ego. The next day, official transcripts confirmed what the video already made clear. Crockett never raised her voice, never used personal insult, never strayed from the record. The same couldn't be said for her opponent. And perhaps that's why the clip spread so fast. Because in a time when shouting gets headlines, restraint still gets remembered. By the time Jasmine Crockett reached the sidewalk outside the courthouse, the flashbulbs had already begun. Reporters called out questions over one another. Congresswoman, did you intend to laugh? Was it disrespect or disbelief? She didn't answer. She simply adjusted her blazer, smiled politely, and walked to the black sedan waiting by the curb. Inside the car, her aide handed over a phone. It's everywhere, he said quietly. And he wasn't exaggerating. Within 90 minutes, the video had reached every major outlet. Cable producers were cutting it into their primetime rundowns. Radio hosts were replaying the audio with slow-motion commentary. Older viewers, the generation that still sits down with coffee at 7 a.m. to watch morning hearings, couldn't look away. What they saw wasn't anger. It was composure under siege. That evening, on the Evening Report, veteran anchor Paul Henderson opened his broadcast with words that could have been written half a century ago. Dignity, he said, looking into the camera. It's a word we don't hear often in politics anymore. But today, a young congresswoman reminded the nation what it looks like. He paused for a beat, the way older anchors used to before delivering judgment. When Representative Crockett laughed, it wasn't mockery. It was the sound of reason acknowledging absurdity and winning. For that audience, Americans who remember the Watergate hearings, the Iran-Contra trials, and the Clinton impeachment testimony, that tone resonated. They'd seen tempers before. They'd seen outbursts. But they hadn't seen composure like that in years. The next morning, conservative talk shows tried to reclaim the narrative. One host accused Crockett of smugness. Another called her condescending. But the footage betrayed the talking points. She hadn't raised her voice once. She hadn't mocked. She hadn't insulted. She had simply laughed when logic finally broke down in front of her. That's what struck older viewers most, restraint. On a call-in program in Ohio, a retired attorney named Walter Green put it this way. I practiced law for 40 years, he said. What that young woman did was the textbook example of courtroom discipline. You don't out-yell a fool. You let him expose himself. Then you put the record in order. His comment was replayed across half a dozen affiliates before noon. By midday, national polling firms noticed something unusual. Crockett's approval ratings had spiked not just among her party, but across independent voters over the age of 55. The analysts called it the civility bump. People were hungry for a reminder that intellect could still win in public life. Editorials poured in. The Atlantic called the moment a masterclass in rhetorical restraint. Politico called it the laugh heard around the hill. Even the Wall Street Journal noted Crockett handled provocation the way trial lawyers used to, with silence, evidence, and patience. Behind the scenes, legal scholars dissected the exchange line by line. On the Legal Forum podcast, former prosecutor Dana Levin explained the mechanics. Crockett did something subtle. She used laughter as a pressure valve. Instead of countershouting, she released tension through tone. That flipped control instantly. Every person watching knew who was grounded in reality and who wasn't. And for viewers raised on the era of black and white court dramas, that felt familiar. The calm attorney dismantling a loud witness with facts and timing, not spectacle. Meanwhile, the congressman's team scrambled for damage control. His press secretary issued a 3-sentence statement late that afternoon. The congressman's passion for electoral integrity remains undiminished. He regrets if his tone overshadowed the substance of his argument. He looks forward to continuing this important dialogue in a more constructive setting. But the statement landed flat. Because by then, the public wasn't talking about policy anymore. They were talking about composure. 2 days later, Crockett appeared briefly on a morning news segment. She didn't gloat. She didn't even reference her opponent by name. "It wasn't about me," she said softly. "It was about the record. We were in a courtroom, not a campaign rally. People deserve representation that behaves like it remembers that." That single line, "People deserve representation that behaves like it remembers that," became the pull quote of the week. It was printed in editorials, posted by law professors, even used by civics teachers in classrooms as an example of professional conduct under pressure. For older Americans, that quote hit hard, because they remember when public service still sounded like service. They remember when hearings meant facts, not performance. Letters poured into her office, not emails, but letters, handwritten in neat cursive, thanking her for reminding them what adulthood in politics looks like. A retired Marine from Florida wrote, "Ma'am, I don't agree with half your policies, but I respect your discipline." That's leadership. Inside the Capitol, things changed quietly too. Other members took note. Crockett's calm became a kind of cautionary tale for grandstanders, a reminder that viral doesn't always mean loud. Committee staffers began referring to the incident simply as the laugh. When tempers flared in later hearings, you could hear whispers among aides. "Careful, don't pull a Crockett moment on yourself." By the end of the week, network analysis pieces were running side by side. On one side, the shouting lawmaker frozen mid-rant. On the other, Crockett sitting still, chin slightly lifted, smiling faintly, the picture of composure. The contrast spoke louder than any commentary. In focus groups, viewers over 60 described the moment as comforting. They said it reminded them of the debates they used to watch before politics turned into shouting matches. One man in Arizona summed it up perfectly. She didn't humiliate him. He humiliated himself. That's why the clip wouldn't die. Because it wasn't just political, it was moral. Older viewers saw in it the kind of calm authority they wish more leaders had. It was a simple truth, quietly proven. When hysteria meets discipline, discipline wins. Every single time. And in that sterile federal courtroom, under fluorescent lights and the hum of recording equipment, Jasmine Crockett didn't just silence a man. She reminded a nation what real authority sounds like. Not the kind that shouts. The kind that doesn't need to. Even days later, the clip continued to circulate. Not because of noise, but because of what it represented. That rare moment when discipline won out over spectacle. In an age where everyone seems to shout to be heard, Jasmine Crockett proved that silence, when used wisely, can be the loudest sound in the room. The hearing transcript entered the record quietly that Friday afternoon. The congressman never revisited his remarks. The court moved on to other matters. But across the country, living rooms were still replaying the same scene, a calm young lawmaker meeting fury with composure and winning. For many who watched, it wasn't about politics anymore. It was about manners. It was about a reminder that character still counts, even when microphones and cameras tempt people to forget. One retired teacher from Wisconsin wrote to her local station, "It's been a long time since I've seen someone handle chaos with such grace. Reminded me of the hearings I used to show my civics class, when arguments ended in facts, not fireworks." And maybe that's why the moment struck such a deep chord. Because for millions of older Americans who've lived through decades of debate and division, they recognized something that had gone missing: composure with backbone. The laughter that day wasn't mockery. It was the quiet signal that reason still had breath left in it. And that, perhaps, is why people are still talking about it. If you've been watching our reports and believe these moments matter, where truth and civility still hold their ground, we invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to this channel for more verified hearings, real discussions, and the kind of steady reporting that respects your intelligence, not your outrage. We don't chase noise here. We follow reason. Because for those who still care about facts, fairness, and the truth, this space will always belong to you. Good night, and thank you for watching.